hardcore boxing fans out there, how are you doing? Big Porky here, the voice of hardcore boxing, and I hope you've subscribed as well, or I'll be coming to pay you a visit.
Porky's Corner is proud to be sponsored by Spartan Site Solutions. They are specialists in civil engineering and demolition contracts for the construction industry. Interested parties should visit their website or contact Porky's Corner for a referral at porkycorner@mail.com.
Hello all you hardcores out there, how you doing? Russ here from Porky's Corner, biggest gob in sport. Just waiting for Julian to log in. Thank everybody for liking and subscribing. I hope you like my Christmas bauble. Do you like my Christmas tree bauble, Julian? How are you doing?
Looking very festive there, mate.
I thought I've had it back. Nicola, Kevin's sister, got some made up about 4 years ago now. It's a long time ago. Yeah, I hope she's all right. How are you?
I'm still struggling with the old back, mate, but I'm all right. I've had a week off work, back at work this week. Good, mate, good. Looking forward to Christmas, probably like everybody else.
Yeah. Did you see any boxing at the weekend, Jules?
I saw bits and bobs. You know what I'm like.
Yeah.
I don't always watch it as it happens. I was actually at a wedding on Saturday. So I caught up with a few bits and bobs on Sunday morning. I thought the Haney Prograis fight was predictable. I thought that would be a cracking fight. Competitive, I thought it would be in terms of some of the action, but it was always going to be Devin Haney on points. But I don't think anybody expected the absolute whitewash that he put on Prograis, who's a good fighter. But this is what happens when you got a quality operator right at the top of his game on a great night. You're putting a clinic like that.
Yeah. What do you see happening with Haney next?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you wonder if he's going to start to go through the weights, which I always struggle with that one. I know he was undisputed at lightweight, and I'm nostalgic, and I like fighters to. Fighters have always moved up in weight, but I do like fighters to absolutely dominate division. But ultimately at lightweight, I don't know what was really left for him. I really don't know. Lomachenko's kind of coming to the end. Tank, we don't really know what weight Tank's going to fight at. So I think he'll see what's at light welterweight, and he'll see if there's any big fights at that weight. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him move up to 147. You've got a real hotbed of talent, haven't you? Anywhere from 135 pounds to 147 pounds. You've got some serious fighters out there. So he's going to be competitive with anybody, really, isn't it, within that area?
Yeah. What do you think about Eddie Hills, the 6-0 Iceman, 4 by way of, from Billy Ricky? His comments regarding Haney being going to be another Mayweather.
This is the danger of saying such things. I mean, I've not really paid too much attention to the aftermath of the fight. I know we'll talk about a couple of things tonight, but he's doing his job. as a promoter. How he's promoted him now, isn't he? He's promoted him previously, then they had a gap. He's doing his job, but it depends what Mayweather we're talking about. If we're talking about the Mayweather who was dominant but not very exciting, I hope that's not going to be the case. Anyone who jumps on me, I think Floyd Mayweather's a great fighter, proven great fighter, by the way. But you don't hear much about Haney outside of the ring, do you? He's someone who operates inside the ring, but Eddie will say that. But Floyd Mayweather was a guy who was unbeaten over, what was it, 20 odd years, 21, 22 years as a professional, and he spent 19, 20 years as a world champion. And there's always every time someone has a big win, I know Haney's unbeaten, by the way, and he's had a few big wins, but every time he's had such a commanding win over a good fighter, everybody waxes lyrical, don't they? And they all get really, really giddy and really excited. But we have to see him against real, risky fights with jeopardy. People would say that Prograis was a risky fight with jeopardy. I'm not sure that was the case. I thought most people thought Haney would win that fight on points.
We had him to win on points, didn't we, me and you?
We had him to win on points. We thought he'd win clearly on points, but maybe in a more competitive fight than we saw. And that just shows how dominant he was and how in front he was. But I want to see him, these 3 or 4 big fights I'd want to see him in before we know if that's the case or not. He's got similar characteristics to Floyd, but we always forget as well, though, that Floyd was a more aggressive kind of, it was a counter-puncher as well, but it could be a bit more aggressive at super featherweight, and he would really let his hands go. And it was only when he became the light welterweight version, and his power didn't really transition to sort of the 140, 147 pounds that we saw Floyd as somebody who his punch economy was absolutely brilliant. But he used different things to get the results, didn't he, when he was a bit heavier. But very, very early to do the comparisons against Floyd Mayweather. Really, really early. But I guess that's what boxing does, and boxing's always looking for the next superstar. I'd like to see him against Tank Davis. I think that would be a brilliant technical fight. I don't know. I reserve judgment, because what we do know is everybody's going to be the next Ali, the next Floyd Mayweather, the next Marvin Hagler, the next Ray Leonard. But the reason we talk about Ali, Leonard, Hagler, and Mayweather and Ray Robinson and those guys is because there's only one of them. And, Devin Haney wants to be not the next Floyd Mayweather. He wants to be the first Devin Haney and be dominant and good at what he does and carve out his own career, instead of being compared to somebody who's way ahead of him right now.
When was the first time you ever saw Floyd Mayweather box? After Olympics, because he got
I saw him briefly in the Olympics. Very briefly in the Olympics. I think I used to watch
Sinclair, one of them. Floyd Sinclair, wasn't he?
Yeah, I used to watch. I used to try and get the Olympic qualifiers if you could get that. Sometimes ITV might show highlights or whatever. Thing before YouTube, I guess. And I'm trying to think when I first saw him, it was probably when he won was it Hernandez when he first won the super featherweight title? It might have been then when I actually saw him on a Sky Sports show. And just like everybody else, I thought it was brilliant. I loved how adaptable Floyd was. I loved when he beat Diego Corrales. He kept dropping him with the same shot, and it just showed how brilliant it was, because he got away with the same shot for 4 or 5 or 6 knockdowns. I just thought it was incredible. I did think, an opinion, by the way, I thought he just about lost the fight to Castillo, first fight. I had Castillo winning that fight. It was 51-49 type of fight. It could have gone Castillo Floyd, and nobody could have argued. But of course, he put in a much better performance in the rematch. But I never really loved Floyd. I think what I did is I begrudgingly started to gain a respect for him later on in his career. I thought Floyd was always unfairly compared to the likes of Ray Leonard and Thomas Hearns, and people would then even compare him to Hagler. And it's like, this is a guy whose best work really was at 9 stone 4 and 9 stone 9. And if you're going to compare him to anybody, we should compare him to Duran and Sanchez and Pep and Sadler and those and Armstrong and those guys, the great fighters of the lower weight divisions. It just showed how great he was, that he was able to go through the divisions and still beat the big names and not have the physicality to compete with them. But he just was so far ahead in terms of his skill. And Floyd's probably the best technical boxer I have ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
Technical. I mean, I don't know if he's the best fighter I've ever seen in my lifetime, but I think technically, I don't think anybody's better than Floyd.
Yeah. First time I seen him, I saw highlights in Moreland's prison when he got bronze, didn't he? He got a bronze. He was called Floyd Sinclair then.
Pretty unlucky, wasn't he?
Got robbed, didn't he? And after that, I seen him beat that Jennifer Hernandez. He won every round against the big magazine top guy, didn't he? He just took the guy he just tore him apart, didn't he, over 12 rounds.
Hernandez was a formidable fighter.
In fact, I think he stopped him, didn't he? I can't remember. Let me have a check. I know he tore him apart, didn't he? And he ended up paying for his funeral, didn't he? Like, because he's passed away, didn't he?
I want to say it was points, but it might be 10th. It might be a later round stoppage. But I want to. You testing the memory there. You must be going back 18, 19
years. 25 years.
Maybe then, yeah, maybe. But what for me was the genius of Floyd was in the ring. He was one of the greatest I've ever seen. I didn't love him like I love the Fab Four, but it was one of the greatest I've ever seen. But outside of the ring, it was smarter than
round 8. Yeah, it was 12 round fight. It was round 8.
So outside of the ring, Floyd was way smarter than Leonard, Hagler, Earns, and Duran because he knew two things. He knew when to get the right fights at the right time, but he also knew when it was time to walk away, didn't he? I mean, he had more longevity than those guys because we've learned more about our bodies and various things, and he preserved himself very, very well, did Floyd, even though he had lots of hand trouble. But he was the smartest boxer outside of the ring in terms of knowing what fight to take when, how to take control of his own career, but also he's looked after his money, didn't he? We know he liked to gamble, but he's probably a billionaire right now. So Floyd was streets ahead of everybody else in so many other ways. I think, as I've said, I think it's unfair to say, would he have beaten Ray Leonard or Thomas Earns or Hagler because they were welterweights, light middleweights. And I know he performed at those weights, but he wasn't at his best at those weights. But the mouth watering, probably one of the top 5 fantasy fights of all time, would have to be Roberto Duran and Floyd Mayweather at lightweight. That would be that's as good as boxing could ever get, honestly.
Yeah. The Cobra's come out and said that Devin Haney, and I quote, he has said, Devin Haney really is a quality class operator. He's got speed, movement, combination punching. He's got that speed that's horrible. If you're in front of Devin Haney and trying to get to him, he's just hitting you with that jab, counter punching, putting combinations together. His footwork, his reflexes, his head movement, it's like he's in the Matrix. He's got you sussed out. I can't blow smoke up his arse enough. What a top quality fighter. Only 25 years old. He's got to be pound for pound top 6, top 7. He's definitely in the top 10 now. He could be the next Floyd Mayweather. The world is his oyster. Could be.
I think it's, as I've said, it's early to tell because one of my favourite fighters of the 80s was Donald the Cobra Curry. And there were various arguments that his amateur career was far too long. But Don Curry, he often goes under the radar, in 1985 was the pound for pound #1 fighter as judged by KO magazine and Ring magazine. So if you're #1, you think about who was around in the 80s. In the 84, 85, we'd obviously got Larry Holmes, Michael Spinks, we've got Marvin Hagler, Arguello, Pryor. We'd got a dream assembly of fighters in 84 and 85. And Don Curry at that time he looked unstoppable, and he was ranked above Marvin Hagler in the pound-for-pound rankings. That's how highly Don Curry was rated. And then one night in Atlantic City, 1986, against Lloyd Honeyghan, it all unraveled and it all went wrong. Now, let's just wait 2 or 3, 4 years before we make claims such as that. But it looks incredible. He doesn't have great power. You don't need it. I've always said, and when I talk about boxing, I've always said, if you don't have great power, you need great physical strength, great core strength. Because ultimately, if you don't have great core strength and you're not a puncher, you're going to get steamrolled, you're going to get manhandled. So you get fighters over the years who have great core strength. So Floyd Mayweather was able to contain the Maidanas and Canelo Alvarez's because he had a very, very good natural core strength. Now, if Devin Haney's got that great core strength, and we'll find out more when he's in a real physical fight, a mauling type of fight, it doesn't need that power. But then you get fighters like a Mark Breland and a Thomas Hearns who have crunching, numbing power, and Deontay Wilder as well, but they don't have great core strength. See where I'm going with this one? So there's certain things I want to see, boxers I want to see ticked with Haney before we start heaping praise on him like Carl Froch is heaping on him, because it becomes too easy to do that. It wasn't that long ago, and as an amateur, Lomachenko might be the greatest amateur who's ever lived. There's a debate to be had for that title, but it was only 3-4 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. People were talking, they were saying that Vasyl Lomachenko was going to be the greatest fighter pound for pound of all time. You never hear that now, do you?
No.
That's never said now. Yeah, it was a great fighter, brilliant amateur career, but we all got a little bit giddy, didn't we? Obviously he got those amazing amateur credentials, and he did lose his second pro fight, crazy doing 12 rounds at that stage. But everybody got giddy. Everyone got giddy about Lomachenko, and they were saying he's going to be the greatest of all time, and he'll surpass Floyd, and he'll surpass this. And obviously, he got beat by Lopez, fair and square, was found wanting in that one. And he's just not looked great ever since. And now he's relatively inactive. He's got another loss on the record, and all that talk has stopped. What we need, and we'll get into this to some extent, which is great that we're getting the best fighters at the moment in the lower weight divisions, are waking up and smelling the coffee, and they're starting to think we really need to fight each other. So, of course, we had the welterweights, didn't we? We had Crawford and Spence, we had Davis and Ryan Garcia, and we had Josh Taylor against Lopez. We've had some cracking fights this year. So what we need to see now, and Prograis and Haney was another brilliant match on paper, we need to see him in a couple more big fights before we know if that's true, because some fighters with the speed that he's got, you can stylistically beat 99% of the guys out there. But there are certain styles that might give him trouble, but we don't know what those are yet. But he's a fantastic fighter, and if anything, I've seen more of him sparring than I have seen Devin Haney fighting, because there's a lot of his early sparring footage when he was a prodigy, when he was 15, 16 years old. Luckily, they captured a lot of that early sparring footage. And you can see then how good he was. And I think that's one of the advantages. I know Terry said this before, Terry Chappindama's covered it so many times before. He says, the depth of talent in the American gyms just for sparring brings people on absolutely non-stop. And I think Shakur Stevenson and Haney and all those guys have all sparred with each other, and I think that also helps them become great fighters.
Yeah. Can I just go back to Donald Curry, because somebody did send something in. It went back a couple of months ago now, and we were going on about how he never did know in amateurs. Donald Curry never lost. Did he lose 1 point in Olympic trials for Moscow? But they boycotted it, didn't they?
Donald Curry would have been the 1980 Olympic gold medalist.
Gold medalist by a landslide, wasn't he?
There's very little doubt about that. He was 396-4 in the amateurs.
Closest to that's Lomachenko. Was he 396-1?
Yeah,
something like that.
Lomachenko obviously had more Olympic and World Championships glory than Curry did. But if you boycott the Olympics, there's nothing Don Curry could have done. Don Curry was a fearsome amateur, and you can't turn around and see. This is the problem: is hindsight or retrospect's a wonderful thing, is it? Because you can start to pick off Don Curry and you start to look at some of the losses he had later in his career. But we all know Lloyd Honeyghan wrecked him. He was never the same again. But if anybody's seen, I always talk about, I'm glad we're talking about this stuff. I know we're going to cover a couple of other things, but it's not about being stuck in the 80s. But if anybody wants to teach their fighters how to fight inside, I always talk about inside fighting being a lost art or being an art that we don't see much of recently. Although there was a cracking fight on Sky last night for the English light welterweight title. And we saw a lot of infighting in that. It was really quality. If anybody wants to learn or wants to study infighting, they need to watch Don Curry against Marlon Starlin. They fought twice.
Twice, did they?
They fought twice, but the second fight for the WBA Welterweight Championship in 1984 over 15 rounds was as good an infighting exhibition as you'll see from both fighters. And Marlon Starlin was an absolute quality fighter. He wrecked Mark Breland. He wrecked Lloyd Honeyghan. Marlon Starlin was an absolute quality operator as an amateur and a brilliant professional. And Don Curry beat him when they were both at their absolute best. And then, of course, Don Curry beat some other good kids at welterweight. And then he ironed out Milt McCrory in 2 rounds, didn't he, for the unification?
He did him, didn't he?
You never see a more brutal, clinical, and the way he made Colin Jones look like a third-rate domestic level operator when we know Colin Jones was everything but. Don Curry was quality through and through, but like a lot of fighters, his star didn't shine as long as we'd like it to. And then there was a decline, really, a gradual decline after the Honeyghan fight. Even though he went on to win a version of the light middleweight title, it wasn't the same fighter ever again. But people look back now and go, Don Curry, I lost a few fights. He's a bit punchy. Oh, he got beat by so-and-so. And they always sound really clever when they're talking about someone like Don Curry. But we know that Don Curry, certainly from 83 to 86, was just unbeatable. It was brilliant.
It reminds me of Bricktop. I saw an interview with Bricktop going back a good few years, and he were asked or collared by some hack, and they were saying, who's most talented kid that you've ever been involved with over all these years? Because Frank Warren's been around it 40 years, and he's been around the game, hasn't he? And do you know who he said? Do you know who he said? I'm going to tell you now. Do you know who he said now? Georgie Collins.
Well, Georgie Collins was a hell of a fighter, wasn't he? I think he won about 6 or 7 or 8 schoolboy titles, didn't he? And he was not having the hardest challenges, but he was a traveller. He was a brilliant amateur. And I think at one point he got to about 31 and 32-0, didn't he? And this was anybody who's watching, this was before fighters that were fighting for world titles after 11, 12 fights. And people started talking about, he's ready for a world title now and all this stuff. People used to fight, didn't they? They'd fight 6, 7, 8 times a year, 4, 5, 6 years. You go the British, you go the Commonwealth, you go the European, And Georgie Collins, it looked incredible, didn't he? And then, of course, the gifted one, Kirkland Lang, he just wrecked him, didn't he?
Kirkland Lang. Yeah, he did. And he never really... It
didn't happen then, and I think Gary Jacobs beat him afterwards. I might be wrong.
Lost to Gary Jacobs, but Kirkland Lang finished him off, didn't he?
Kirkland Lang, that's right. Kirkland Lang just savagely stopped him in, I think it was 5 rounds. But yeah, these are names, and Haney's obviously a different level to Georgie Collins. But I guess the point we're making, Russell, is when you've been around boxing for so long, and someone starts waxing lyrical about the latest up-and-coming fighter, when you become a little bit cynical and a little bit older, you kind of raise your eyebrows, don't you? And I remember my dad doing it to me when I'd be saying, "Oh, you were
33-0 at one point."
That's right. I remember my dad saying to me when I was going nuts about Mike Tyson on the way up, and my dad goes, "Let's see how his career finishes, son." He goes, "It's a marathon. It's not a sprint." And I, you're young and our 1985 when Tyson burst, 84 when Tyson turned over, and then he burst through in 85. I was young and I was like, Tyson nuts. About 13, 14-year-old, and my dad's like, oh, he's good as Tyson, but I think at some point someone will line him out, and it's just his experience, isn't it? It's just experience. Although Tyson was a great fighter, by the way, before anybody jumps on me and say he wasn't exactly a journeyman. Tyson was a great fighter. He was a great heavyweight, but he wasn't the cream of the top 10, was he?
You see, I felt sorry for George Collins because, the word at the time, we were on a Mike Barrett show. I know Bricktop were involved with him, but he got shafted in a Commonwealth title fight against Gary Jacobs by 1 point when they only had the referee. The referee made the decision in them days. You remember? And
I mean, they still do for non-title fights, don't they? But I don't get that rule. I've never liked that rule.
Well, Mike Barrett, obviously the promoter, and blah blah blah. Gary Jacobs, home guy, and Bricktop going up against the cartel wanted back then. He was taking them all on wanting Bricktop.
Jarvis is staring those guys, yeah.
And Mike Barrett, Jarvis is there, Mickey Duff, all them. He got stuck into him, Bricktop. No messing about, didn't he? This is why I give that's the respect that I give him, because he got stuck into them, didn't he, Bricktop? He was fearless, wasn't he, when he came?
Absolutely fearless, and he wouldn't budge, would he? He wouldn't move at all.
No, and Gary Jacobs really got an hometown decision, really. There, a lot of people said George Collins won, and maybe that knocked his confidence in going into that Lang fight, because they got him out, didn't they, against Lang?
I have to watch it again, Russell. I really would have to watch it again. From memory, Georgie Collins had a brother who was a pretty good kid as well. But I'd have to check that out because we're testing the memory now, domestic level. But I mean, Gary Jacobs was a slick southpaw, wasn't he? He was a really classy, pressure fighting southpaw. It was one of those. Gary Jacobs was kind of a Maxie Hughes type southpaw. He was really economical with his shots. He was crafty, had good feet, a bit like Floyd Havard. Remember Floyd Havard, the super featherweight from Wales? Really slick. I like to see a slick southpaw who doesn't need to use the outer circle of the ring. That can literally they can almost do their work on a sixpence, can't they? And I think Maxie Hughes is that type of fighter, and Gary Jacobs was. And he gave Pernell Whitaker a 10-round fight, didn't
he? Yeah, but I just think that, when I look back at Georgie Collins, I always think he never won anything. And he got to 33-0, and everybody was saying they were going to go all the way, and then boom, bad decision like that. And
I think it might have been a bad decision, but I also remember Russell. It's been a while since I've seen him box, but I think this is where having a really great coach who understands the transition from the amateurs to the pros can come in and help as well. Because thinking back, Georgie Collins, every time I saw him, he got a little bit faster and a little bit fitter and a little bit more experienced and hit it a little bit harder. But he never seemed to fully shake off his amateur style for me. And I think that's something you really have. I'm not saying you have to give everything up with the amateur credentials that got you to titles, but he never really stopped that amateur style, that broom up the spine. A bit like Richie Woodall. I know he went on to win a world title, but never shook off the amateur style, did he?
Yeah, Richie Woodall. Yeah, he never made that transition, did he?
Even though obviously he won a version of a world title, did Richie Woodall? He just was super, super fit and did everything he did in the amateurs over 12 rounds. But it's like I said, you've got to learn to fight in the pocket. You've got to learn to fight inside. And I think style-wise, I think Woodall, he had some fights what were right for him, but some fights what were wrong for him. But he was a good fighter.
When you went out to New York, obviously you went out there to go around the gyms and that. How long was that?
I was there on business, but I've been twice, and I spent 2 full days at Gleason's. Yeah.
What did you think?
Loved it. First time I went to Gleason's, I'm going to get the year wrong. I'm going to say it was 2010, but I'll get the year wrong. And we used to go to a show in New York, a social stationery show, the Certex show. And I went over there. And before I went over, I'd rung Bruce Silverglade up, and I told him who I was. I said, I'm training a young pro. And I went over and I loved it. And I was still fit at the time, fitter than I am now. And took my wraps over there, and I just took some training gear, and spent a couple of hours there talking to the coaches. Had a bit of time with Joey Gamache. He took me on the pads. Then I had did some technical work with Hector Rocker. Obviously, I was trained pretty much everybody, and I loved it. And
Did
what
you
I
see
loved,
Teddy Atlas?
no, I didn't see Teddy Atlas. There was some really good fighters over there. The first time I went, there was like Augie Sanchez. I think he's dead now. There was Oleg Maskarev, who beat Asim Rahman, and Vivian Harris, of course. Vivian Harris at the time was a WBA light welterweight title, who Junior Witter beat.
Yeah, Asim beat him as well.
Yep, there were 4 or 5 really good fighters over there. And then the second time I went there was when the ash cloud erupted over Europe and we were stuck in New York. It's no bad thing for about 11 days. And I rung Bruce up again and I went over. And the second time I went over, Paulie Malignaggi was there. And I spent a lot of time with Paulie Malignaggi and I was chatting to them. And Bruce said, do you want to come back tonight? He says, we've got some actual boxing. There was some pre-junior Olympics bouts going on at Gleason's. And I stayed and I got talking to, like I said, Paulie Malignaggi. I've got a couple of nice pictures with Paulie. And Paulie was asking me about Amir Khan. And it was maybe 3, 4, 5 months before Malignaggi fought Amir Khan. And he was asking me what I thought. He says, have you had any, do you know Amir? And I says, well, the kid I trained actually sparred with Khan twice about 3, 4 years before Malignaggi fought him. And he asked me, did Paulie? He says, really nice guy, chatty guy. He says, go on, be upfront with you. How do you think I'll do against Khan? And it was one of those moments. You know what I'm like? I'm polite, but I'm open. And I said, I think Amir's going to beat you, Paulie. I said, no disrespect. I says, you both got really quick hands, but Khan's got quicker feet than you, and Khan punches in combinations, and you tend to just do them
He's
all
a pot shotter, isn't he?
Yeah, I says you do the 1-2. I says you'll do 2 shots here, 2 shots there. I says Khan's blisteringly quick. I says, but his combination punching is just like, I don't think he'll give you time to set your feet, and I don't think you hit hard enough to beat him. And you know what he turned around and said to me? He shook my hand and said, thank you very much, Julian, for your honesty. I really appreciate that. He says, there's not a lot of people would have said that to me. And I just told him I thought Khan would beat him. And obviously he didn't think that would be the case. And then me and Malignaggi, Bruce said, he goes, when the boxing was starting, he said, it was streaming, it wasn't filmed, it was like streamed online. And Bruce said, do you and Paulie want to do some commentary? So I did about half an hour commentary with Paulie Malignaggi, and that was it's a nice little special memory for that. And
what arena was that at then?
No, that was no arena. That was at the Gleason's gym. They used to do amateur boxing shows. The gym's massive. They're 3 rings. Have they got 3 rings? 1 training ring, 1 competition ring, 1 sparring ring, from memory. And yeah, I did. We commentated for about 4 of the bouts. Some really good junior fights on there.
That Julian, Paulie Malignaggi and Julian, eh?
I have to send you I've got the picture on my laptop somewhere. Malignaggi was it was great. It was really chatty and kind of in your face just like you see him on interviews, but it was really in your face. But you know something, when you go over to Gleason's, they make you feel so welcome. They're so warm, they're so nice. Bruce is an absolute brilliant guy. And my memory of going over, the first time I went over, it was everything I thought it would be. It's quite a rundown gym. It's huge. You go over the bridge, over the Brooklyn Bridge, and there's a couple of gangs hanging around, and I thought, shit, how do I get in here? And there's a taxi rank literally about 20 yards from the gym, and you need to get a taxi to get back over to Manhattan to New York. But I just remember having such a good day. But when I walked in for the first time, you know, like it was like a scene from like a proper old sawdust and spit gym. And there was Hector Rocker and 3 or 4 guys sat there playing cards. They got money on the table. They were playing cards. And they were just world-class fighters in every single corner. It was brilliant. And I just remember watching Oleg Maskarev spar a heavyweight whose name I didn't get. And it was vicious sparring, you know. You hear about these gym wars. and the sparring over there was absolutely vicious. But great memory, mate. Really, really good memory.
Okay. Ebanie Bridges, she got beat. What did you make of it?
Listen, right. Ebanie Bridges getting airtime. I'm going to be quite harsh here, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to someone who's achieved more in boxing certainly than I did. Easily, she was so-called world champion, but it's been one of the biggest heists in boxing over a long, long, long time. And they've really conned the viewers and they've really conned the public. And I remember saying a few years ago on a well-known Facebook page, and I basically said that Ebanie Bridges, she couldn't really fight and she certainly couldn't box. And this was just before the fight against Shannon Corney. Yeah. And I got slated for it like you do, but I stand by that initial assessment. Now, how she's got to fight for a world title and win a world title is anybody's guess. And this is not an assassination. This is the truth. Ebanie Bridges can't box one bit. She really can't box one bit. I saw highlights of the fight and then I started watching the full fight just before this call. Saw the first 3 rounds. Now, I don't know what Dave's been doing with her, but he'd have been better. Instead of trying to show her how to throw a jab, because we suddenly saw this jab in an Ebanie Bridges fight that we've not seen before. It might have been better to show her how to actually to stand and how to close the distance. At one point in the first 3 rounds, I just counted Ebanie Bridges throwing 17 jabs, and they were all about 10 to 12 inches away from her opponent. Literally throwing jab, 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 and her feet were planted in cement. Her opponent wasn't moving away. She wasn't slipping the shots. She was stood in front of her, right? She stood in front of her, Russell, and she still couldn't land a jab out of 17 jabs. Now, how bad is that? This is World Championship boxing. This is not white-collar boxing we're judging Ebanie Bridges on. This is World Championship boxing. So a little bit of trivia for you. I don't normally look at this stuff. Ebanie Bridges' opponents, yep, combined 80 wins, 54 losses, and 7 draws. On paper, she's 9-3, 9-2, but you and I know she should be 8-3 because when she fought Gangloff, I think it was at Ellen Road, she absolutely scandalously got a decision that was one of the worst decisions I've ever seen. It was like the Campbell Hatton second pro fight decision, where the fighter who would want to win just gets the decision. So she should be 8-3. But ultimately, Ebanie Bridges has never been remotely a world-class fighter. She's never been remotely one of the 10 best fighters in the world. Before anybody makes excuses for her, she's just lost to an opponent who, first of all, has a really patchy record. She had a majority win over someone who was 6-6-2. So 6 wins from 14 fights. She scraped through the skin of her teeth, did her opponent. She was ranked number 10 in the world. She's had 2 weeks' notice, and incredibly, Ebanie Bridges' opponent, whilst having 0 KOs, has only been with her new coach for 2.5 weeks. And she's gone in and trounced Ebanie Bridges. So it's not being mean. We need to, anybody who's promoted Ebanie Bridges as a world champion or as a talent, and any prick who has said she's the Muhammad Ali of female boxing,
Like the dad said in his video,
needs to hand in his journalistic or his whatever credentials he's got. He needs to leave them at the door and walk away from boxing, because we're talking about waxing lyrical. Now that was ludicrous hype, was that. I've never heard as much nonsense in my life. She can't box, she can't fight, she can't defend a shot, she can't punch. But she does get big viewing figures when she strips off at the weigh-in. And is that where boxing's got right now? I've got no issue with Ebanie Bridges boxing, but she needs to be on those Misfits shows. She needs to be fighting Ellie Brook. That's what she needs to be doing, because it's embarrassing and it's taken this long for people to wake up. And anybody who was watching that, if you think of being harsh on Ebanie Bridges, right, it's not about that. It's not about being harsh and singling out people. This is a sport we love. And you should want, all of you, before anybody defends Ebanie Bridges, you should want your world champions to be world class. You should want your world champions to have at least a specific or a certain skill set, and at least to be able to move the feet and jab in sequence with the feet. She couldn't even land a jab against a stationary opponent. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen. I don't know what Dave Caldwell, and I know Dave, I like Dave, I don't know what Dave's been doing with her. Maybe Dave's just been shaking his head all along. But
they're thinking of the money.
Thinking of the money, definitely. It's now time to stop this crap. Yep. Stop this rubbish and stop putting her on television, because there are tremendous female boxers out there who are good ambassadors for female boxing and for women in sport, and they're empowering, and they're not getting an opportunity because they're not doing what she does to get the views. So Eddie Hearn, Frank Smith, Gareth A. Davis, anybody who's been involved in promoting her and building her up as to be some kind of world champion, you're all hanging your heads in shame, because if you truly believe she can box, then you shouldn't be allowed to comment on boxing ever and ever again. And I genuinely feel like that, mate, because it's become embarrassing now that is TV worthy. That is TV worthy. And then we had Katie Taylor and Chantel Cameron. What a fantastic fight. 2 fights they've had. Look at Serrano and Katie Taylor. Look at some of the Ellie Scott. Look at some of the really talented fighters like Natasha Jonas. Got Natasha Jonas, and we've got that on TV. Get out of here.
Yeah, it's bad. Do you want to go on to
coming to the end and have Insta? Thank you.
Want to go to part 2, mate? Yeah.
Let's do it, Russell.
You liked that one, didn't you? Right, first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for liking and subscribing. It means a lot to me, because we're on this journey together, aren't we? So anybody got any ideas for the channel, fire them over to me, porkycorner@mail.com. all right? Shout out to Innovation Alloys and South Yorkshire Packaging, all right? Don't forget to subscribe, keep on trucking.